There is a pattern in history that signals the death of a democracy, not by invasion and not by revolution, but by a specific transfer of power that happens in the shadows. It has happened 3 times in the last century during the collapse of major economic orders. In 1923, Germany, the government stripped the central bank of its independence to fund the Ruhr resistance. 30 days later, the currency was dead. In 1971, the United States president demanded the Federal Reserve chairman burn the economy to ensure his re-election. 30 days later, the gold standard was erased and the era of perpetual inflation began. In 2026, we are standing at the exact same precipice. Right now, there's a clock ticking down that most Americans cannot hear, but every banker on Wall Street is watching in terror. In 30 days, the Federal Reserve, as you know it, will cease to exist. This isn't about an election, and it isn't about a resignation. It is about a mathematical singularity that has finally arrived. The man currently running the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, knows something that he cannot say publicly. He knows that the United States has entered a phase called fiscal dominance. He knows that the $38 trillion debt load has become mathematically impossible to manage with traditional interest rates. And he knows that the incoming administration is about to face a choice that hasn't been made since the darkest days of the 1970s. Donald Trump believes he is about to take command of a booming economy, but the data says he is walking into a trap laid by 4 decades of debt, by a banking system addicted to cheap money, and by a Federal Reserve that has run out of ammunition. In 30 days, the buffer between politics and the money printer disappears. And when that wall falls, history tells us exactly what happens next. The currency is sacrificed to save the state. This isn't prophecy. This is pattern recognition. Let me show you how the capture of the central bank has destroyed empires before, why it is happening again right now, and why the next 30 days will determine the value of every dollar you have saved for the rest of your life. Before we look at the history, you need to understand the mechanism. You need to understand why the independence of the Federal Reserve is the most dangerous lie in modern economics. We are told that the Fed is independent, that it makes decisions based on data, not politics, that it raises interest rates to fight inflation even if it hurts the president's popularity. This independence is the only thing that gives the US dollar its credibility. It is the reason foreign nations hold our debt. They trust that the Fed will protect the currency rather than protect the politicians. But there is a rule in economics that overrides this independence. It is called fiscal dominance. Fiscal dominance happens when the national debt becomes so large that the central bank loses the ability to set interest rates. Here's the math. When the government owes $38 trillion, every 1% increase in interest rates adds $380 billion to the annual deficit. If the Fed raises rates to fight inflation, they bankrupt the government. If they lower rates to save the government, they cause hyperinflation. When a nation reaches this stage, the central bank is no longer independent. It becomes a hostage. The new boss of the Fed isn't the person sitting in the chair. The new boss is the debt itself. The pattern shows that when fiscal dominance hits, the political leadership always tries to seize control of the money printer. They cannot afford to let the central bank do its job, so they break it. They install a loyalist. They change the mandate. Or they simply issue an executive order that overrides the bank's authority. It is a structural conflict between a government that needs to spend trillions to maintain power and a central bank that knows the system is insolvent. History shows there are only 3 ways this conflict ends, and none of them are good for the saver. Let's look at the first clear example of this pattern. Weimar Germany, 1922. Most people think the German hyperinflation was caused just by printing money, but that is only half the story. The real cause was the political capture of the Reichsbank. In 1922, Germany was crushing under war reparations. The debt was unpayable. The Reichsbank, the German central bank, was technically independent. Its president, Rudolf Havenstein, was a conservative banker who believed in sound money. He wanted to stop the printing presses to save the mark. But the government couldn't afford sound money. They had payments to make. They had a populace that was starving. They had a political crisis in the Ruhr Valley where French troops had invaded. The political pressure became overwhelming. The government effectively told Havenstein, print the money or the nation collapses. This is the moment the new boss took over. The independence of the central bank was surrendered to the immediate needs of the state. Havenstein caved. He began discounting government debt, essentially printing money to pay the government's bills directly. He thought he was saving the government. Instead, he destroyed the nation. Once the barrier was breached, the market knew the game was over. Confidence evaporated. In January 1923, a loaf of bread cost 250 marks. By November, it cost 200 billion marks. The lesson from Germany is specific. As long as the central bank was fighting the government, there was tension, but there was stability. The moment the central bank surrendered to the government, the collapse happened instantly. It wasn't the debt that killed the currency. It was the loss of the check and balance. Today, we see the same pressure. Politicians are demanding the Fed lower rates. They are demanding the Fed support the economy. They are arguing that the debt doesn't matter. They are pushing for the same surrender Havenstein made in 1923. The second example is closer to home, and it is the direct ancestor of the crisis we face today. In 1970, President Richard Nixon was facing re-election. The economy was slowing down. Inflation was rising. The Vietnam War was draining the Treasury. The chairman of the Federal Reserve was Arthur Burns. Burns knew that the right thing to do was to raise interest rates to kill inflation and protect the dollar. But raising rates would cause a recession, and Nixon told him in no uncertain terms that a recession was unacceptable. Nixon didn't just ask, he bullied, he threatened. He was recorded on the White House tapes telling Burns, "We'll take inflation if necessary, but we can't take unemployment." This was the hostile takeover. The President of the United States effectively became the boss of the Federal Reserve. Burns surrendered. He kept interest rates artificially low to pump up the economy for the 1972 election. He poured gasoline on the fire. The result was the 1970s, a lost decade of stagflation. The dollar lost half its purchasing power. Oil prices quadrupled. The stock market crashed in real terms. But the most dangerous consequence was the decision made on August 15, 1971. Because the Fed had printed so much money, foreign nations started demanding gold for their dollars. The U.S. didn't have enough gold, so Nixon closed the gold window. He ended the Bretton Woods system. He turned the dollar from a currency backed by an asset into a currency backed by nothing but faith. This is the system we live in today, a system born from a political takeover of the central bank. But here's the difference. In 1971, the U.S. national debt was 35% of GDP. Today, it is 120% of GDP. In 1971, we had a demographic boom. Today, we have a demographic cliff. Nixon had room to maneuver. He could kick the can down the road. The man taking office in 2026 has no road left. The 30-day window we are facing now is the echo of August 1971. But this time, the numbers are too big to hide. In the next part, I will show you exactly how the mechanism of control works today, why the new boss doesn't even need to fire the chairman to seize control, and the specific mathematical trap that makes this takeover inevitable within the next month. This section covers parts 5 through 8, bringing the historical pattern into the immediate present and delivering the final prediction. We are now watching the third iteration of this pattern play out in real time. The date is 2026. The debt is $38 trillion. And the conflict between the White House and the Federal Reserve is no longer a debate. It is a war for survival. The media paints this as a political battle. They say Donald Trump wants to fire Jerome Powell because of personal grievances. They say he wants loyalists in power. This is a distraction. The truth is much colder and much more dangerous. Trump, or any president sitting in the Oval Office, has no choice. This is the terrifying secret that Powell knows. The math has made independence impossible. If the Fed keeps interest rates high to fight inflation, the interest payments on the national debt will consume 100% of tax revenue within 3 years. The government will cease to function. The military will not be paid. Social Security will not be sent. The empire collapses. If the Fed cuts interest rates to save the government, inflation will reignite and destroy the purchasing power of the middle class. The president cannot allow the government to collapse. No leader can. So the choice has already been made. The new boss of the Fed is the executive branch. In the next 30 days, we will see the pivot. It might not be a firing. It might be a resignation. It might be a new emergency facility created to buy government bonds. The method doesn't matter. The result is the same. The Federal Reserve is about to become an arm of the Treasury Department. Its job will no longer be to protect your dollar. Its job will be to fund the government at any cost. This is the moment the pattern converges. Just like 1923 Germany. Just like 1971 America. The political necessity of survival overrides the economic necessity of sound money. Why is this happening now? Why in the next 30 days? Because we have reached the mathematical point of no return. The United States is currently spending more on interest payments than it spends on the entire defense budget. We are spending more on interest than on Medicare. We are borrowing money just to pay the interest on the money we already borrowed. This is the definition of a Ponzi scheme, and like all Ponzi schemes, it works until the new money stops flowing. Jerome Powell knows this. He knows that he is driving a car with no brakes toward a cliff. He has tried to signal this to Congress. He has said the fiscal path is unsustainable. In central banker language, that is a scream for help. But the politicians are not listening. They are promising more tax cuts, more spending, more stimulus. They are promising a boom. But you cannot have a boom when you are drowning in debt. You can only have an illusion financed by printing money. The new boss isn't coming in to fix the economy. He is coming in to manage the bankruptcy. The plan is simple, and it has a name: yield curve control. The Fed will be forced to buy government bonds to keep interest rates artificially low. They will print trillions of dollars to buy the debt that nobody else wants. This keeps the government solvent. It keeps the stock market up. It makes the president look like a genius. but it destroys the currency. This is the trap Powell sees. He knows that once yield curve control begins, it never ends. You cannot turn off the printer once the government is addicted to it. So what does the next stage look like? We don't have to guess. We just have to look at the 1940s. After World War II, the US debt was 120% of GDP, exactly where we are today. The government didn't default. They didn't tell bondholders, we aren't paying. Instead, they orchestrated a soft default. The Federal Reserve capped interest rates at 2.5%, while inflation ran at 6%, 10%, even 19%. Do the math. If you own a bond paying 2.5% and inflation is 10%, you're losing 7.5% of your wealth every single year. The government paid back every dollar it owed. But those dollars were worth less. They transferred the wealth from the savers to the state. They liquidated the middle class to pay off the war debt. This is the plan for 2026. This is why the Fed must be captured. To enforce the cap, to force you to lose money safely so the government can survive. The new boss will implement this strategy. They will call it stabilization. They will call it patriotic investing. They will say it is necessary to compete with China. But make no mistake, it is a confiscation of wealth. It is a 40% tax on everything you own hidden in the price of groceries and gas. The pattern is stage 7, the soft default. It is the only way out of the debt trap. The government chooses inflation over bankruptcy every single time. And the central bank is the tool they use to do it. The next 30 days are the transition, the changing of the guard. The moment the independence of the Fed officially dies and the era of permanent fiscal dominance begins. The pattern is clear. The precedent is set. The math is undeniable. The Federal Reserve is about to be captured and the dollar is about to be sacrificed. So what do? If you understand the pattern, you do not hold the asset that is being destroyed. You do not hold cash. You do not hold long-term government bonds. You do not trust a savings account that pays you 4% while inflation eats 10%. You become your own central bank. History shows that in every currency collapse, 3 things survive. First, gold. The only asset that is no one else's liability. It survived Rome. It survived Weimar. It survived the 1970s. It is the alarm bell that rings when the system is burning. Second, scarcity, productive land, real estate that generates income, things that people need regardless of what the currency is worth. Third, the new lifeboat, Bitcoin, the only asset in history that cannot be diluted by a politician with a printing press. It is the optical opposite of the US dollar. The new boss at the Fed isn't coming to save you. He is coming to save the system from you. He's coming to dilute your savings to pay off the mistakes of the last 40 years. You have 30 days to look at your portfolio and ask yourself one question. Do I own things that can be printed, or do I own things that are real? The 30-day clock is ticking. The transfer of power is happening. The pattern is completing. Most people will watch the headlines and argue about politics. They will miss the signal. But you have seen the pattern. You know the history. You know what comes next. Don't be the liquidity for their exit. Subscribe to this channel. We are tracking every stage of this cycle. The next video will cover the specific executive orders being drafted right now to lock your capital into the system. You need to see them before they are signed.